Hello. In today's video, I'm going to talk about volumetric efficiency. And back in the 80s, when I was first learning this stuff, the magazines and the books and all said, basically you increase the airflow to a motor, you increase the volumetric efficiency. You basically fill the cylinder better and you make more power. And a lot of people seem to still believe that. And that's not really the case. So let's kind of walk over what actually controls volumetric efficiency so that you can make some better decisions about what you're doing. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that volumetric efficiency is tied to inertia RAM. Inertia RAM, even at 80% volumetric efficiency of a stock motor, of an OE style motor, is still controlled by inertia RAM. And that is because we basically need it in order to fill the cylinder. We go past bottom dead center. We hold the valve open later and we use the inertia of the charge coming in to fill the cylinder. And I know what you're saying. Well, no, if you have enough airflow, it'll fill. But we don't see that. If you look at a regular dyno run, a lot of times you actually have a curve. And the torque peaks out at its highest volumetric efficiency. That is your most efficient point in the motor. And I've talked before about how torque should be basically a flat line. So what's happening down here at the lower RPM? Well, if you look at CFM demand, you will see that at 1,000 RPM, if the head flows, say there's a small block Chevy, and the head flows like 250 CFM. I mean, we're not even giving it a real big head, kind of a stocker OE iron head. Well, the demand at 1,000 RPM, if you calculate it, depending on the engine size, is like 30 or 40 CFM. So with 250 CFM, we should have enough flow to fill the cylinder. And technically what we should see on torque is at the lowest RPM, it's at the highest volumetric efficiency, falling as you go in order to say that airflow is controlling how well the cylinder fills. We don't see that. So there's obviously other things. Now, I have already said that inertia RAM is part of this deal. And the closing point will affect volumetric efficiency. The inertia RAM chart starts at basically 80% volumetric efficiency of an OE motor and goes up to 130. It's not about just making power above 100% volumetric efficiency, which some people seem to think that's all inertia RAM is about. It's about just how it runs, even down here at 80. And so as you start to carry this out further and further, you can increase the volumetric efficiency because you are giving it more time from TDC to valve closing to fill the cylinder up using the inertia of the incoming air. Because remember, this air has to, when the valve opens, it has to get up to speed, it has to fill the cylinder, and then you're dealing with it going down in speed as you start cutting off the flow and the valve goes shut, and then this needs to be full. Well, that takes a certain amount of time. You're not just working from TDC to BDC like we thought back in the 1900s. And that's why back then, volumetric efficiency was down at like 50–60% because we didn't understand it. We had to learn that you have to carry it beyond bottom dead center in order to get that fill. So as you start to pull this out, you will gain volumetric efficiency. But the other thing that happens is it starts moving up in RPM. You gain more volumetric efficiency, but you gain it at a higher and higher RPM. So why is that true? Well, because at low RPM, you have pulse back, and I've talked about this. It will try and push the air back in because you don't have enough airspeed to keep it piling in at the low RPM. Now, some guys will say, well, you need to pull that back. Well, if you pull that back, your volumetric efficiency drops. That's not really what it's about. You can push this out, but the piece to be looking at is the airspeed. It's really about the airspeed. And that's why in the previous formula for CFM demand, I said that volumetric efficiency had nothing to do with what we were looking at in port flow. We have port flow, and we are not meeting volumetric efficiency. It's really about the airspeed and the closing point on the camshaft. The time here with the airspeed. The reason it doesn't happen till peak is because you need the RPM to gain the airspeed. And so as you push this down, you gain volumetric efficiency, but you have to gain airspeed by going up an RPM. And that's if you do nothing else in the engine. That's how it's going to behave. So the question becomes, if we really want to do a better job of filling down here, if we want that flat torque curve and we want that power down here, which I've said before, a lot of people have trouble making that extra power down here. You can throw a cam in, you can throw big heads on, you can make power up here. That's fairly straightforward. But making power down here, you've got to be aware of how it works. And what you really want is to fill the cylinder better down here and even at peak torque in order to get more torque being generated. And so how do we go about doing that? We've already said if you increase the airflow in the cylinder head, you actually move the RPM up. Well, that's because as you increase the flow in a head, your airspeed drops. And you need that airspeed to get it back up. That's why a lot of guys will tell you, well, this particular head at 300 cc's is just too big. And that's because they're trying to control airspeed right here. Now, idealistically, it would be a good idea to have airspeed at the valve. In a perfect world, that would be great. Now, we've talked about cross-sectional area, and most of the time, your minimum cross-section area is at the push rod, not at the valve. And that's not something you easily can control. It's just kind of how it goes. But don't be looking at the head. The head is the end of the runner. If this is a little big, it doesn't matter. And that's why guys can do dyno tests with a particular head that has a higher CC, a bigger valve, a higher flow, and yet they'll come back and they say, well, that theory is incorrect, that kills low end torque. That's wrong. Well, that's because your intake is what's actually controlling the airspeed. This is where, especially in inertia ram, this is where you should be looking. And typically on those dyno tests, you'll find that they used a smaller intake, Victor Jr. instead of a Victor or a Super Victor, and that drove up the airspeed. That's where they found it ran the best. With that increased airspeed at low RPM and increased flow and later closing, they got a better fill and they generated more torque. And that's really how it works. So you have to not necessarily move this back, you have to increase your airspeed. And I have done this successfully on engines. One of the ones we did with Courtney Hines, he built the motor, but it was for farm truck and a 500 cubic inch Cadillac, but he wanted to maximize the torque down here. He wanted to make it as much torque as possible. And so I had to put in a fairly in-between cam. We're talking something that was probably a Z of 9.2. We're talking something that's like 236, 238 duration at 50. And then a cylinder head that flowed gangbusters, an aluminum cylinder head that flowed 340, 360, somewhere in that neighborhood. It's the good aluminum Cadillac Boogeyman head. And then we put on a Edelbrock Performer intake. Now that's a dual plane, and it has the separated sections which drives up airspeed, and the runner itself can only flow 300 CFM. And by doing that, below where 300 CFM on demand, if you do CFM demand, you can see somewhere around 5,000 RPM, that is about where you run out of air. Well, that's exactly what happened. We wound up with a big boost in torque up to about 5,000 RPM, which is where we just flat ran out of air. So that you made best use of the airspeed in the engine by using a smaller intake on a larger head. We had the ability to flow the air, and the intake was actually becoming the restriction. Now, you could say, well, if you went to a bigger intake, you can make more power. Well, yes, but you're going to make more power up here where the CFM demand is higher. That's why we look at some of this, is we are trying to control it where we want to be. So down here, you need decent airspeed and enough flow to carry you to the RPM. A lot of guys will say, well, I just want an intake that's big enough that it's more than big enough to flow what it needs. That is not correct. This is your airspeed. If you go too big on the intake, it gets way soggy down here. And you need to pick up that airspeed. Now, you don't necessarily do it strictly by reducing the cross-section. That will help. If you follow inertia RAM, you can see you also could do it with a longer runner. And that's why a lot of the OEs started running longer and longer runners, is they could get away with more airspeed and problems at the low RPM where most people drop. So if you follow inertia RAM and you realize it works down here, and it's not just about the maximum airflow, you can see that it really is controlling your volumetric efficiency and why you need to size this stuff correctly. Why you need to know what does the intake flow. Where is that going to carry me to? Is that going to get me to a high enough RPM? If you're really building horsepower, remember, you're up here. If you're really building torque, you're down here. But if you're really building torque, you want to try and make the best use of this cylinder you can. If you have enough airflow and you don't want to give it a lot of cam, you can make some horsepower up here. But you are going to limit the volumetric efficiency even up here. You want to try and carry a bigger cam and deal with the airspeed so that it's correct. This is why there's a lot of different intakes out there, and why as heads of flow have increased in flow, so have some of the intakes. Now, you don't want to go straight to the biggest intake. And there's plenty of dyno tests to show that the Edelbrock RPM dual plane tends to beat a lot of single planes. Well, that's about airspeed. That's about runner length. As a longer runner has more airspeed. So as long as it doesn't restrict the flow, you're okay. And that's what the CFM demand is about, is you want to look at how much flow you need to get up here. Because even if you're filling this past 100% using a really big can, say you're up here at 1.12, you're trying to get 12% above 100% volumetric efficiency. So you're holding this way later open. That gives you time. Well, it's not about the flow so much as it is about the time. The 80%, the 100% volumetric efficiency, 115% is really about the time that you are filling that cylinder, as long as you can maintain that airspeed. If you can't maintain the airspeed, then you won't even reach the volumetric efficiency. It'll be down. Even if you're up here trying to make inertia work, up here trying to make inertia work, that's where you're really wanting it to work. Well, you have to pay attention to airspeed. Otherwise, and I've seen this a lot, is you can run a cam that has a Z of 1.15, but it will not give you the complete full fill past 100%. Because if you don't have enough airspeed to pack that cylinder, it's not going to do it. It might have enough airspeed to carry it up to 100%, and that's all the power you make. And so you're running a cam that's way big, that may be hurting you down here, and it's not gaining you up here because you didn't have the airspeed to carry it. And so you need to pay attention to this in order to get that complete fill that you're looking for. And that's why on a lot of regular motors, especially ones that are driven, I say don't go above like a 256 cam, or technically a Z of 1. That's 100% volumetric full. And that you can achieve with fairly decent airspeed. But to get it more full, you really have to make sure that at whatever RPM you're at, that airspeed is pumped up. Now, I keep saying up here is where you're thinking it's going to happen. Well, that's because up here is where the airspeed is getting way up there. And you need that in order to get past 100% fill. You have to watch your airspeed. And the main controller of your airspeed is the intake manifold. And that needs to be sized correctly for whatever it is you're trying to make happen with the motor. And you can use efficiently a intake a lot of times that's smaller and longer runner. Now, I know longer runner is sometimes hard to get because packaging limits the size of the intake. But pay attention to taper. You know, taper will make the runner appear shorter. A longer runner will give you more inertia, gives you a better fill down here. And so that's how you go about making sure that this is more of a flat line and then just peters out when you run out of airflow. And that's what you want. You want it as full as you can all the way until you just flat run out of air and you're up at the RPM you want. And that's why we do all of this math, is to see where you're going to fall and how you're going to make it work. And there are certainly more examples of this, but that's really the three components you're looking at. You could pull this back and shorten what you need to help down here. And that's what most people do. But in reality, you're better off holding that open longer and getting more airspeed, because you will get more volumetric efficiency and generate more power down here. That is the goal of volumetric efficiency. Otherwise, we just keep, even if you're at 80%, just keep cranking up the RPM and you'll get there. You know, because it will fill, if you have enough airflow, it will fill even at 80% up there at 7,000. It's just at 100%, you can make more power. So that's volumetric efficiency, and if I haven't gone over it real well, or if I'm talking too fast, or you need to understand a piece of this better, or if we just want more examples, let me know in the comments, and we can do a second part to volumetric efficiency. But like I said, there's three components. Airspeed is one of them, airflow is one of them, and the closing point of the cam is the primary thing that you want to try and make happen to increase your volumetric efficiency. So that's how it goes, and I hope this helps you in your builds, and I hope all your projects go well, and we will be talking to you later, and see you on the next video.